Hi everyone, JUSTPADRIDE Snowboard channel with episode number 3, and this is part 2 of a 3-part series about finding the right snowboard boot. So first and foremost, I want to say that fit is always king. If you're in a boot that fits you super well and supports you really well, don't consider swapping boots just because of one of the features that we'll be discussing here today. You have a variety of things, standard laces, just like in a normal boot or shoe. And then you have BOA dials and you have speed zone lacing, which are laces that lock into a cleat upon being pulled. The side BOA laces the bottom, like the instep, and the top BOA here laces the very top of the boot. That is an important feature because first of all, you might have a high instep and need this to be pretty loose, therefore this to be very tight, or the opposite way, you want some more freedom of movement here without slacking off the bottom. So it gives you a lot of flexibility to really fit the boot to your foot shape and riding preference. The other thing is, if you buy, let's stick with BOA here for a moment, if you buy a single BOA boot, and the dial in the center laces the entire boot, what's going to happen is that the cable tension is highest at the top, and then down the line there's so much cable friction that the bottom actually doesn't tighten up properly. So what's going to happen is over the day with you moving the boot, this lace tension is going to eventually distribute evenly, meaning that the top gets looser. So you will end up thinking after the first run, oh, my boots are loose, and you retighten, and you might be doing that 3 times until you have even lace tension all across the boot. Then if you go for the double BOA, there are some manufacturers offering what looks to be dual zone lacing, and actually the side BOA only tightens the tongue internally. So K2, for example, have this Conda chip. It's a little chip inside the boot that pulls your heel in, but then the dial on the tongue laces the entire boot. So as much as you do have the option there to really lock in your heel and get a bit of a lower zone flexibility with your lacing, at the same time, your speed dial here in the middle is still doing the whole thing, and you will still run into that same issue that I explained to you before. With speed zone laces, I personally have not come across a system that has a single zone speed lace system. So mostly you have 2 handles left and right lacing the lower part and the upper part, and yeah, that's great. Standard laces have their own benefits as well, and the obvious thing is they're very easy to replace, and they're also very easy to fix. You can just tie a knot if something breaks on the hill and you keep riding. That's probably the biggest advantage. Some people also say that you can really dial in the tightness very individually by simply crossing the lace 1 extra time rather than doing just a single cross. You go 1 loop extra, and that basically separates any zone that you want to create. The friction in your double cross will basically prevent the boot from tightening further down or higher up, however you want to lace them. So that gives you great flexibility, but it does not take away from the disadvantage, which is potentially sore hands if you ride a lot, like I get, like calluses from lacing the boots in the morning. And I find it a little bit frustrating since I'm very happy with BOA or speed zone, and personally I opt for either one of the 2 systems. Right here, the upper cuff is basically overlapping the lower part of the shell, and that means when my boot flexes forward, the sides, like the upper cuff, can move over the lower part, basically a little bit like in a ski boot. The thing with that is, if this is one piece and you don't have the articulation, this area here is basically what creates the boot's stiffness for the most part. And you can imagine that flexing this 100 times, you will break down this area in no time. So your boot's going to lose a lot of its stiffness probably over the first 2-3 weeks of riding. It's a bit of a bummer. Boots with an articulating cuff should rely on the stiffness either through the tongue or on this boot here, the Ride Insano that I ride, you have like exposed plastic in the back, and sometimes that is stitched in and it's not visible, but you want something solid either in the back or a somewhat solid feeling tongue if your boot does have an articulating cuff. That kind of design offers the greatest durability in regards to flex. You don't want boots that have an excessive amount of rubber from the sole coming up around the toe and heel, creating extra length, because that will simply create unnecessary toe and heel drag. There's a bit of a rocker in the heel and big time here in the toe. So when that boot is standing here, I can actually get my hands underneath. That's kind of important. Like, I like to tip my board high on edge, and I want to ride the narrowest board possible. I do ride pretty wide boards, but I want to get on the functional waist width, the narrowest possible waist width that I can get away with without ever booting out. And if you are aiming for that kind of performance, this is why we talk about the boots. It starts with the boot. Binding size comes out of the boot size. Board width, after all, can also come out of the boot size. So make sure you get those boots right. Personally, I think a snowboard boot should have a rubber outsole. It doesn't have to read Michelin or Vibram or whatever, but simply opt for something that isn't an EVA foam. EVA foam is this squishy, I think it's a closed cell foam. It feels pretty foamy. It doesn't feel rubbery. And that material, as much as it's really light, and that obviously is nice to have light boots, it is also very slippy. So in a slippy parking lot in spring in the morning when it's icy, or on a hike, backcountry hiking, whatever, the rubber sole clearly wins over EVA foam. These days, most companies bank on what they call out-of-the-box fit. And out-of-the-box fit means that they use a fairly low-density, thick foam as a liner. And when you slide in there, you feel like you're wrapped in cotton balls and it's all beautiful and amazing. And the downfall of that kind of material is that it squishes down really, really easily. And therewith, the boot packs down and might, end up being actually too big after a week of riding. And the other thing too is the softness of the liner cannot actually hold your foot shape. You will heat mold those and it almost doesn't matter. So a higher density foam, like my aftermarket Intuition liners, that's a totally different ball game. When I squish these, they really keep their round shape here. And that is a closed cell foam that really molds around your ankle bone and everything, and really takes the shape of your leg almost like a cast. And the beauty of those things is simply they last forever. Like, they last a very long time. And if you are riding, whatever, 30 days plus per season, I'd say, I think it's worth it either investing into an aftermarket liner or opting for boots that you think are feeling a little bit more dense and a little bit firmer to start with. Obviously, that means you don't have an out-of-the-box fit, and that might not be the boot that feels the best right out of the gate, but heat molding those will very likely turn them into something out of your wildest dreams. I think it is a very good idea to have the lacing of your liner come in form of a harness. So this harness here has my liner laces attached to it, and the harness is actually stitched to the shell of the boot. So when this liner is in there, the harness is gonna sit like so, and when I lace that harness up, it pulls the whole liner and my ankle into the heel pocket of the boot. So basically, having a harness that is attached to the shell rather than laces directly attached to the liner is another ounce of security around your ankle. And that is the most important area you want to focus on. All right, so that's it from me for boots. And there will be a part number 3 to this, where we dive into actually fitting a boot and dissolving some problems that may still occur even though you think you found the best boot possible. So we'll be talking about stuff like what I did here, little donuts or J-bars or insoles or shims or all these little things that you can still do to actually make a boot that is semi-decent fit much better. That'll be next time, and thanks for dialing in. If you want to be notified when that episode drops, maybe follow me here and make sure you get the notifications. Otherwise, happy days.